So I was always very interested in science as a child, and my first degree is in genetics and microbiology. My master's degree is in oncology, and my PhD was actually in genetic vaccines. And I was there's two groups here in the country that did the work. And my external examiner was Professor Angus Dalgleish, which people will probably know.
I
Um,
recognise the name.
yeah, guys know, yeah. And but I didn't stay in academia because I saw that there was something going on. There was something wrong with the funding mechanism, the peer review system, and how research was carried out in general. So I saw that the things that were really good ideas didn't seem to get as much money as the ones that were funded by commercial interests, for
Mm.
instance. And I then thought, well, writing a research paper is interesting, right? But until somebody actually proves it, like in the real world, then that research is not going to be able to help humanity at all
Mm.
because it's just a research paper. So I was more interested in getting great inventions and ideas from academics or inventors, like in the private sector, whatever, and turn them into something, to products that really matter and could change the world. And during that process, I worked in many different scientific and engineering disciplines. So I worked broadly across, civil and building engineering, manufacturing engineering, chemical engineering, software, biological sciences. I ended up working in their enterprise, basically. Commercialization of technology really was the backbone, 3D printing, all sorts. And what I saw in the academic space is that, you know, really to write a research paper and get it peer reviewed and published doesn't mean that it works. Okay,
Mm.
this is the thing that people have to understand. Peer review is not about someone has said, okay, this is true because they've done it. What it means is it has the experiment and been written up in a way that the journal accepts it. And if there's some obvious reasons why it doesn't work, then it gets to and from before it's published. But the most important thing about actually that whole process is, does what's been written get backed up by the science that's always been written? So you end up with central dogmas, as they call it in science, and therefore ideas are only kind of carried out if it's based on a previous idea. And if that previous idea or that previous experiment
So it ends up being a little bit like Chinese whispers.
does, you end up with this like loop, like this virtue signaling loop.
Mm.
And we saw this a lot with virology and certain things that were determined about virology, like this molecule called reverse transcriptase. And at first they said only viruses have it. So if you ever see it in any kind of sputum samples or multiplication samples, then it must have come from a virus. But about 7 years later, that was debunked completely. But then still at universities, and so this is what I was taught. I wasn't taught that experiment. I was taught the first one. So when you get these ideas that are then kind of debunked later by science, it's not necessarily carried through the publication literature and the teaching literature. So everything is there, it's just kind of very skewed. And I hope people that can see that I can speak out at an educated level on these things and an objective level. But unfortunately, with science, it's very much about the money. It's a very tight system. I mean, scientists don't actually get paid very much money, not compared with doctors, by the way. It's a very poorly paid profession. And actually, in academia, people don't actually get a full-time contract that they can even get a mortgage on, right, properly. They get these short six
They were
months,
zero
3 years.
hours.
Yeah, well, they're like short-term contracts, 6 months, 3 months. Will I get the
Mm.
next funding? So their continuation in employment is very much reliant on getting the next funding tranche until there are maybe about 40 odd. So everyone's very motivated. Everyone's got this time sticking. We've got to publish some papers. If you don't publish papers, we don't get funding. If our experiments don't work like we said they were going to, we don't get funding. So the perversion is, you say as a scientist, I'm going to do this research because of my research I've done before, And because of my research that I've done before, I'm going to be able to show A, B, C, D in a deeper way or a more broad way or whatever it is. And if you don't, you're not going to get any more money.
So
So
it's
everyone,
also a case of it keeps them in the fear paradigm, and
oh,
it keeps them in the lower vibration. So it probably makes them not even be able to think outside the box other than what they're being told.
very stressful. And I come across
Mm.
very many postdocs, these highly qualified people, like in their 30s with families who, well, we haven't got another grant, we haven't got any grant funding coming in. And it wasn't because they were bad scientists, it's because the science wasn't going in the direction that was being forced. And even above that, and this happened kind of in the early 2000s. So I saw this flip that really was funding bodies decided what research was going to be carried out, and that the research that were going to be carried out was going to be need-led and need-led by industry. So what that meant was instead of scientists just researching stuff and seeing what happens and then producing that and then people creating kind of information and a whole new fields as a result of it, industry said, we want you to prove this because we think it's important. These funding bodies, which is a handful of people, told the whole of the UK, and this is happening in all other countries, okay, this is what we think is like global warming's real or this, that, and the other. And your job is to prove this. So give me some funding ideas that would prove these paradigms. And so everyone's research really was about kind of proving the narrative. And it's very,
Mm.
very few people that control, therefore, and it's very corporation led about what research actually carries out. And that is not science. Things stopped becoming scientific, and the science community, like in academia, stopped becoming scientific. I would say, I mean, it was always a little bit there, right? But definitely the end of the 90s, early 2000s, that
So
flip
that
happened.
kind of ties in quite nicely with Tony Blair, the Fabian Society, and wanting to turn the Western world into communist
Yeah.
countries, basically. And this is one way of doing it, more control.
Yeah. So then people are in this industry, the whole, oh, well done, you're a doctor, I've given you respect, etc. You're in this bubble, everyone is thinking the same way, even industry think that academia is ivory towers, have this ivory tower way of thinking. They then have these students, and the students pay for an education, so everyone has to pass and everyone has to toe the line. And if you don't, you lose your job, you lose your credibility, you lose your identity, if that's become your identity.
And all the
Uh,
money it's cost you to get you to that point.
Exactly. So
Mm.
it's very hard to get out.